Oh, my microphone is stuck. My microphone is stuck. Hold on. Got it. Got it. My microphone got stuck, in case you didn't notice. We've got some lofty goals today, kids. Some very lofty goals. Today, I am going to attempt to explain the basics of food and wine pairing. It's a huge subject, but we're gonna try and boil it down to brass tacks so you can get the most out of your next eating and drinking and dining experience. Think we can do it? I guess you'll just have to wait and watch and see. Hello wine lovers, I'm Erin, the founder and chief sommelier here at the Wine Sisters, and this is our YouTube channel. This is the very place where every week we teach you how to eat, drink, and entertain like a pro. Well, all month long, it's been back to school, and in our case, it's back to wine school. Because I lead a wine school here in Toronto, Canada, I've been taking the questions that are most often asked by the students and the guests that we lead through these tastings, and I've been bringing their queries and bringing them to you, because chances are if one person's wondering it, lots more are wondering it as well. So today I'm tackling that nebulous big subject of food and wine pairings. And before we even get into it, I want to assure you that you're doing it right. If you're loving what you're eating and you're loving what you're drinking, it's going to be great. Now I know that's cold comfort because sometimes you just want the answer, so I'm gonna try and endeavor to do that. But know that you probably have more power within your own taste buds than I can even grant you. It's the whole reason why we have milk and cookies and peanut butter and jam and steak and Cabernet. The very same reason as to why we don't have sushi flavored bubblegum, right? Like we know what works, we know what doesn't. But let's try and boil that down a little bit more. I'm gonna tell you about the structure today. Now, because when it comes to the flavor of wine, whatever your favorite is, when it comes to the flavor of wine, that's highly objective. My lemon might be your lime. My peach might be your apricot. And in fact, because especially on the beauty of the internet, the beauty of YouTube, we're all tuning in from different places, far-flung across the world. What's an available ingredient in one area of the world may not be easily available in another, so we may not be speaking the same language in terms of what the flavors are coming across on our palate. But that being said, there are some some factual things that happen in wine. And the first is the structure of that wine, the building blocks of that wine. And what goes into all wines to some degree is going to be acidity. For example. Now, we all know what acidity is, and it comes across your palate like what will happen to your palate when you do one of your apple cider vinegar shots during detox month, or when you have a squirt of lemon. That bright acidity that comes across your palate, that gives you the sexy saliva pool under your tongue, that pinches your cheeks and clenches your bum, maybe makes your eyes water a little bit. That's the acidity. And some wines, such as champagnes, Sauvignon Blancs, Rieslings, they're naturally very high in acidity, and we have a tendency to start meals with them. Other wines that still will have some acid, but not quite as much, we've turned down the dial a little bit. Perhaps that's going to be Viognier or Gewürztraminer. They're going to be a little bit lower on the acidity level. But all wines need to have some acidity. All good wines need to have some acidity, otherwise you're just drinking juice. Now, the next structural component of a wine is going to be the sugar itself. Now, of course, alcohol is a product of sugar. And then when we're talking about wine, we're talking about sugar that comes from grape juice, and then it's fermented, and yeast eat up all that sugar to some degree, and they will turn it into alcohol. What's left behind will leave you either a dry wine, so there's very little residual sugar or leftover sugar noticeable in that bottle, or there might be quite a bit. And that will come through for dessert wines like ports or ice wines, something like that. And you might be wondering why I have this nail file out. I find this is a really great way to demonstrate what tannins are. Tannins exist in the skin of grapes. They also exist in dark chocolate, walnut skins, black tea, even tree bark. But I don't recommend eating tree bark unless you're super, super hungry in the middle of a hike. I wouldn't do it if I were you. But tannins, just like acidity and just like sugar, where you might have a lot or you might have a little, tannins that show up typically in your red wines, because your red wines are the ones that have that skin contact, you could have a little bit or a lot. And it's kind of like an emery board or a nail file. One side, it's a buffer side. It's not quite as rough. and then the other side might be very rough. And tannins are very much the same. Tannins come across your palate sort of like when you've just left the dentist and your mouth is full of cotton balls. There's that grit that it leaves behind in your mouth. And it might be sort of smoother, fatter, plumper tannins, or it might be quite aggressive, your lips are sticking to your teeth kind of tannins, but that's that. So those kind of the structures that we're looking for wine: acidity, the sugar, the tannins, and then the alcohol itself. So you'll see this printed right on the labels, of course. Some might be 8%, some might be as high as 15.5%, but that's also what's going to give you some indication to the weight of the wine, the body of that wine. Typically, lower alcohol wines will be lighter bodied, and the more alcohol there is in the wine, the fuller bodied, the more powerful those wines are. Why am I talking to you about these structures? Well, typically when we're looking to match food and wine and have a successful pairing, we're looking to play with that. So we're going to take, for example, a fuller bodied wine, let's say like a really rich Cabernet, and we're going to pair it with an equally full meal, a steak, or a roast, or a braise. And if we have a very light white wine, for example, we might then choose to pair it with sushi or oysters, or you might do something like ham or a roast chicken. So that's what we're doing, is we're looking at the fullness or the lightness of the body of the wine and then pairing it accordingly. But what a lot of people will do is they'll play with that structure, that acidity and that tannin level. And they'll say, okay, my wine is really high in acid. And what does acid do really nice with? It cuts through fat really, really well. So just like how you might be served a wedge of fresh lemon on fried fish, and you squeeze that high acid lemon over that batter, it cuts through the rich fatness of the batter to brighten the food a little bit. And you can do that with your food and wine pairings. You can take a higher acid wine, like we talked about, your champagnes, your Sauvignon Blancs, your Rieslings, etc. And you can pair it with a really creamy dish, a really rich dish, and then that will cleanse your palate. It will cut through that fatty richness of the dish, cleanse your palate, and get you ready for the next bite. Similarly, that fat that's in that dish will round out the corners, those angular corners of a higher acid wine. For reds, for example, that might be packing a lot of tannins. So I'm thinking about things like Cabernets, certain Shirazes, Barolos, these wines that have a lot of heft and have a lot of that grippy tannin, well, they're perfect mates for those rich red meats, because that protein and that fat that's in a T-bone steak, let's say, or a tomahawk steak, or ossobuco, whatever, those fats and those proteins that are in that meat will latch onto those tannins. They'll smooth those tannins out, and the tannins will also do the same for that meat, breaking it down a little bit and making them harmonize together a little bit more. What we also sometimes will do is we'll do things like match flavors. So when you're thinking about a creamy sauce, something that's buttery and creamy, well, you might choose to pair it with a creamy and buttery wine, such as a Chardonnay. Or if you have a really earthy beef stew, for example, you might choose to pair it with an equally earthy flavored wine like a Pinot Noir. And if you have something that's vegetable forward, let's say a stir fry or a great salad that has all kinds of lettuces and herbs, you might then choose to pair it with a wine that also is herbaceous in flavor, like a Sauvignon Blanc or a Gruner Veltliner. And all of this works. But if you are new to the wine world, you might just be the kind of person, you might be at the stage of the game where you're learning, but right now wine just tastes like wine to you, right? You're not at the stage where you can take out the lemons or the cherries or the plums or the herbs or the whatever that is in that wine. Maybe you're at the stage where you're like, I actually don't know what flavors are in that wine. And that's okay. Here's what I think works really well, and this is my favorite trick, the coup de grace. This is my favorite trick to teach new wine lovers on how to pair wines with reasonable success. And that is to treat your wines like another accoutrement to the dish, another sauce, another dressing, another flavoring to that dish. Let me try and explain what I mean. So in a couple of weeks, Canada will have its Thanksgiving. In another month or so, Americans, you're going to be having your Thanksgiving. So it's all going to be great for everybody. So let's take that Thanksgiving Day turkey. And you can scroll back to last year and see all of our great posts about preparing for Thanksgiving. Lots of you love them. Thank you so much for the love. We're going to have more great Thanksgiving content coming up in the next few weeks. But when we think about Thanksgiving, and as I always say, we try not to go for one perfect wine because it's a fool's errand. It'll make you lose your mind. But what do you pair with turkey most of the time? Well, you would pair gravy, and or cranberry sauce. Those are the two typical sauces, gravies, flavorings. So let's break that down a little bit. Gravy, for example, is so delicious because it's just melted fat. Like, oh my God, is it ever good? Like, I might start drooling, it's so good. But what is the flavor and structure of that gravy? Well, it's oily, creamy, buttery, fatty. It's all of that slippery goodness coating over your tongue. Well, what goes with those same kinds of structures in the wine world? Typically what pops to most people's mind is it going to be a Chardonnay, a nice buttery, creamy Chardonnay. And in fact, that works beautifully with your turkey. Now, on the other hand, we also have cranberry sauce, and cranberry sauce is a flavor of, well, cranberry. So it's got that tart note, it's got that juicy note. Well, Pinot Noirs are very similar in that aspect. They have that cran cherry note. They have that tartness. They have that brightness. And so they also go beautifully with your Thanksgiving Day turkey. They pair beautifully. The acidity in that Pinot Noir helps to liven up the dark meat of your turkey, and it certainly helps moisten up that dry white meat of the turkey as well. So those are two great pairings. Now let's take it to the end of a meal, and let's say that you're having like a really deep molten chocolate lava cake, a death by chocolate, something super chocolatey. Well, what do people pair with chocolate a lot of the time? Often it's going to be some kind of toffee, caramel, nutty flavor, or they might choose to do some kind of coulis, like a raspberry, strawberry jam-like kind of flavor to pair with their chocolate. Now, I'm not much of a stickler, but the cardinal rule of pairing food and wine is that your wine absolutely must be sweeter than the food. The reason why, if you don't, is that both are going to end up tasting bitter, metallic, flat, and fairly lifeless. So when we're looking at pairing a very sweet dessert, like this super chocolatey dessert that our fictitious, our imaginary example here, well, like I said, when we're having, you could pair very easily some kind of toffee caramel, some kind of nutty flavor with it. Well, if I need something that's sweet and has notes of toffee, caramel, nuts, praline, something like that, well, maybe a good option to pair with my chocolate cake would be a sweet sherry. And it would be a very good option. Or if I'm going more that fruity route, that kind of coulis, that raspberry, strawberry sauce, well then perhaps what I want to do is a Cabernet ice wine, which would be delicious with your chocolate cake. And again, it comes in sweeter than the chocolate, so both are going to be bolstered. It's going to be delicious. So I really like using that for wine lovers who are still a little bit vague or confused about the individual flavors of each wine. And you don't necessarily even need to go, break out your map and even know where these wines come from to try and pair local ingredients with local wines. If you just sort of break down the food and what would be those sauces that you'd probably naturally pair with that, you can then successfully pair a wine just as easily. I hope that makes things clearer. As I said, it's a lofty subject, but if you do have questions about any of your upcoming food and wine pairings, just write them in the comments below and I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I see them. Now, another thing you guys might want to consider doing as we move through the holiday season, we have a newsletter at the Wine Sisters that comes out every week, and it's filled with great stuff. Food and wine pairings, wine recommendations, easy recipes, great cocktail ideas, terrific entertaining tips. In fact, our holiday guide will be coming out very soon, and people love downloading that. It's downloaded by the hundreds of thousands every single year. Hundreds of thousands might be a bit much, but like a lot of you download that guide. And so, yeah, head over to thewinesisters.com, or actually I put the link below. Sign up for our newsletter and you can get all of that kind of goodness, and check out our blogs. We've got lots more information on food and wine pairing. But that's kind of the crux of it, you guys. Try not to sweat it too much. Enjoy what you're going to enjoy. Consider the weights of the food. Heavier foods with fuller bodied wines, lighter foods with lighter bodied wines. If you want to start experimenting with the structures, acidity with creams or tannins with fats and proteins, go ahead. And it's just super fun to do, but I really do think that you should just sort of think about what would be the dressing here, what would be the sauce here, and that might make it a little bit easier for you. Was it? Did it help? Even a little? I hope it did. Anyway, friends, next week we are back with our final segment of our September Back to Wine School. I'm taking all of your questions and answering them in one neat video. So if you have any of them, make sure you get them in right away, so that way I can address comments and concerns that have to do with wine or food or cocktails or entertaining. But we're gonna have a whole lot of fun. So until I see you next week, friends, hey, and make sure you don't miss it. So hit that bell and subscribe. And don't forget to leave us a positive review. And if you don't have a positive review, just pretend I didn't say anything. Okay, guys, I'll see you next week. And until then, stay well, drink better.